Right. Hi again. Welcome everyone to another Know Your MIP call, in this case, number 2. I'm happy to be here with a lot of people interested in Maker. Today is December the 7th, 2020, 5 p.m. UTC, and Lev or Equivrel, I'm probably massacring that, sorry in advance. We'll talk a bit about MIP30, which is the Farmable cUSDC adapter, i.e. CropJoin. So, Lev, if you want to take the floor, it's all yours.
Hi. Cool. So I'll start by quickly summarizing what the MIP is about, and then hopefully we can spend most of the time answering questions or discussing something, just because there's more value in that, I think, than lecturing the MIP. Obviously, please check out the MIP itself and the proposed implementation, which, by the way, is more or less frozen at this point, and there haven't been any changes to it at all actually since the MIP was submitted to RFC. So to discuss what the MIP is about, I would like to basically make 3 points about it. The first point is introducing a general technical framework for onboarding kind of claims on assets that have a sort of a so-called farming yield component that can be claimed by the CDP user. That's kind of the first sort of technical innovation here, which allows you to do something that you could not do with existing Maker adapters. So this MIP proposes a framework for how to implement that, and then it's fairly straightforward to actually adapt the CropJoin to cover assets other than compound. Obviously, the easiest one to adapt to is other compound assets. For those, it's very, very easy, but it's also designed to be usable for stuff like sushi and uni rewards and other stuff. Of course, it's more complex if you're onboarding stuff that has like multiple tokens involved as components, but basically the kind of reward farming part is captured. So that's the first point. The second point is the specifics of the implementation here concerning compound. So I'll discuss a little bit how that works, and there's some things that are specific to farming in compound that this MIP takes advantage of in order to do so optimally. And the third thing is just a small comment on the economics specifically of deploying this with compound USDC, which is the kind of example that's proposed in the MIP, and that I'm kind of offering to the community and the risk teams as the one that they should target initially, because just the economics and from a business and peg management perspective, the parameters there are very compelling. So those are the 3 things that I'm going to summarize, and then for the rest we can discuss it, and you can ask questions that are related to those 3 or not. There was a nice list of questions posted by Alexis in the forum. So I would say, well, perhaps giving priority to questions asked by folks here, but if there aren't enough, then I would like to go through those questions because they're pretty good.
Hi.
So anyway, hi.
Alex, on call. Sorry.
Oh, okay, perfect. Then you can ask your questions and we can go through.
Yeah, you can go. It's yeah, no problem.
Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, I just said that because I thought that if someone here had like questions that they were asking now, then I would answer them first. But that's great. Okay, so just to do my quick summary, and I really will try to make this not too long. As I said, the MIP proposes a way of claiming farming rewards in favor of a CDP user. So basically, prior to this MIP, if we wanted to onboard something like cUSDC, which is a compound claim on USDC, which earns interest, we could do that, and I mean we had community green light polls for that asset as well, even though it hasn't been it hasn't been onboarded yet. We could do that, and it would work fine for capturing the kind of native compound interest that you earn by your cUSDC tokens appreciating. But ever since Compound introduced the comp farming rewards earlier this year, the way those work is that's like a side reward that's given to you that isn't baked into the value of the token. So if you were to implement that naively, the comp reward would actually be wasted because it would accrue to the adapter, and the adapter wouldn't know how to distribute it to users, and the system wouldn't even know how to claim it. So really, one way to look at it is how to design a system such that the adapter can pass through these extra rewards to the user, the CDP. Obviously, the question you might want to ask there is, should the system claim those rewards, or should the user claim the rewards? And obviously, you could have it both ways. So you can also try to build an adapter that basically collected the comp and sent it to something controlled by MakerDAO. I think most people would probably agree that it's more compelling to pursue implementations where the farming reward accrues to the user. I mean, firstly, it being the user's collateral, the user kind of, owns that asset. And moreover, if you have an alternative platform where users are earning this comp reward, then Maker looks fairly uncompetitive if you have the ability to deposit this there, but you don't get the comp reward, Maker claims it for itself. So you could do it both ways, but it seems like the more interesting thing to do in this kind of environment is allow the pass the rewards through to the user with the adapter. So basically, what this thing is a slightly more complex adapter that keeps accounting around how much comp or like arbitrary reward token has been earned at the aggregate level for the whole adapter, and then has some internal accounting to allocate that to users based on how big every user's deposit was. And in this way, the accounting that it does is basically agnostic to how the actual reward distribution works in the target farming platform. So we don't need to like reverse engineer and duplicate Compound's or whoever's formula for figuring out how much comp users are earning, and that could potentially be really complicated. So they could make that something, they could upgrade that to something very complex where it was changing all the time and stuff, and it would, it wouldn't break our accounting because we would simply look at how much had been accrued by the adapter as a whole over a period of time. And this is what makes it generalizable potentially to many other farming schemes. So I think that there's not that much more to say there. I don't see a point right now to go into technical specifics unless someone asks a question about it. But basically, it's an adapter that has logic to keep track of how much comp to give to each user. And when a user interacts with the adapter, either by withdrawing their collateral or adding more, we just check how much have they accrued since the last interaction, and we pay that out to them, which is also similar how comp rewards actually work if you're interacting with Compound directly, which is that they pay out comp to you every time you interact with the system, the amount that you've accrued since the last time. So from a UX perspective and everything like that should be pretty easy for users to take advantage of. Okay, so I'll move on to the second part, which is a little bit more.
Are there any questions before we move on?
Oh yeah, sure.
I think it was quite clear, but maybe there's. All right.
I'll just add on to what Lev said. So we're designing it to work with like farming tokens, but it doesn't have to be things we don't have to strictly be doing farming with this. It can just be stuff that brings some income in another token that we want to distribute to people. It's a bit more general than farming, and this is why we're passing on the token to the user so they can decide what they actually want to do with it. It might just be to wrap it up in a farming operation and just sell the token, but we're trying to make it a bit more basic and general than that, so that people can actually build stuff around this.
Lev or Rain, either. How do you guys make sure that it's generic and that it's not comp specific? Like, what's the logic behind that?
Existing rewards contracts are, for example, like they come in two major forms, which are the way that SushiSwap did it and the way that SNX did it with SNX rewards contract. Both of these rate of reward, which isn't really applicable here because we do not know ahead of time how much comp we will be getting. So the way that we do it here is we just look at how much comp or whatever token it is was received since the last time we checked, and then we distribute this to the people in the contract. We don't have to and because of this, we don't have to do any logic about how comp behaves or anything. We're just literally looking at how much comp is in the contract and how different this is to last time.
Makes sense.
And because of this, it'll work with all kinds of different reward tokens.
Just to comment there on the generosity of the mechanism, we're not claiming that it's actually generic in the sense that you should be able to plug in any farming reward and it will necessarily work perfectly. It's more that it's designed with the hope that it will be generic. Because in fact, in the way Maker does things, we actually never assume that anything will work with an arbitrary external contract. Like the way we handle normal ERC20 tokens, we don't claim that the standard adapter will work with all ERC20 tokens. We still have the smart contracts team doing a assessment of every new token with respect to the adapter that it will be used with. So it's definitely the same here in the sense that, and they've had to modify the adapter on a few occasions because of tokens that were slightly different. So the claim definitely isn't that this is going to work out of the box. You still need to do an assessment for each case to see if there might be something that breaks it. I mean, later on in the call, I'm happy to give examples of things that might create issues with this for other farming assets if we have time.
And just real quick, you said that other protocols can use this. So I guess somebody like Backstop Protocol, B Protocol, can easily use it by opening it up to USDC and having a simple way to get a USDC vault, and B Protocol users can get comp rewards, right?
Well, you can definitely integrate whatever you want with this. I don't know about B Protocol specifically because that takes advantage of liquidations and liquidation rights. Since we're currently talking about USDC, this isn't an asset that even has liquidations enabled yet. So probably, I don't know what B Protocol would actually do with this, but a perfect example would be there's a lot of kind of farming or yield or optimization oriented dApps that build kind of packaged solutions for people putting in tokens and trying to get maximum yield. And that's someone that could definitely integrate this.
Cool.
So is there an additional benefit for the users? Because comp gives you rewards both on the supply and the borrow side. So aren't users basically exposing themselves to the risk of comp, but then only getting half compensated for the borrowing?
That's a good point. So here, maybe it's time for me to go into the second part that I promised, which is specifically how the compound side works, and then I'll touch on exactly that. So it's exactly as you say, in compound, and this is what most of the large scale farmers in compound are doing, which is that they're both supplying and borrowing the assets that provide the highest comp yield. And this is because you can actually significantly increase your total yield, measured as on top of your kind of initial deposit by doing this rather than just naively kind of supplying or borrowing one asset. So if you actually, I have actually a script for this that uses the Compound API to look at the top positions, which I'm happy to share if you want to look how other people are doing it. But basically, what these people are doing mostly is finding an asset that they want to deposit, and then they end up borrowing an asset that has an attractive yield. So either that's the same asset or it might be something else like DAI. And then they end up resupplying that and using that as a base to borrow more and so on until they basically get up this position that's internally leveraged with a much higher comp yield than just a basic deposit. So consequently, this scheme that we're proposing would only be efficient if we could also take advantage of a similar thing. Otherwise, this thing will be kind of hamstrung by basically not having the flexibility to optimize yield in this way. So that's where kind of the less generic aspect of this of MIP30 comes in, which it's factored out into a separate file in the source code called wind, which implements this compound specific logic, and that's done basically by taking the user's initial deposit of USDC, supplying it into comp, but then having a parallel set of functions that can actually borrow USDC from comp and resupply into comp in order to basically get up to an attractive kind of internal leverage figure that then gives you a much higher yield. And this is done asynchronously from the actual deposit. So if you simply deposit into it, you're just putting USDC in, but then there's a pair of governance configured parameters for the kind of lower and upper bound on the on this kind of internal so-called leverage, which either borrows a little bit of USDC and resupplies it into compound, or withdraws some of the supplied USDC and repays it from the borrower in order to move the collateral ratio of the position up and down to keep it within safe limits. And in this way, you basically go from low single digit percentage yield to high teens percentage yield. So here there's a few more moving parts. So perhaps I'll rely on the questions to drive the discussion of that. I also invite you to look at the code, because it's actually not as complicated as it sounds. But the basic idea is that we want to kind of target not simple USDC deposits into compound, but more of a strategy which has a set of two bounds kind of set by maker governance that will get your user a much higher comp yield than a naive deposit. And of course, the point of using this as a CDP collateral type is that you can then further optimize this yield by borrowing DAI.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to be too pushy, but regarding my question, actually, it was more like regarding the CF account. I think it's a fixed data, the coefficient, the collateral factor. And my question was basically, if Compound changes collateral factor, what happened with the contract? So I think it happened once already. They switched the factor from 0.8 to 0.75. And in that case, I think basically if they switch back to 0.7, we will be out. So the vault will be eaten by Compound.
So what I want to do with this, so right now you're correct, it is hard coded in the source code. I'm just going to add a function which is controlled by maker governance, which can tune this this parameter. So in the event that Compound does do an unannounced change in its collateral factor for USDC, you could just adjust this downwards. In principle, you would be at risk of liquidation if you exceed the collateral factor. But as far as I can tell, for USDC versus USDC borrowing, in Compound, liquidation is not actually possible.
My second question was also, sorry, I put all my question on the line, boom, boom, boom. So basically there is a MIP or something like that for Compound that's, I don't know if it passed yet or not, but they wanted to vesting the time and to lock the distribution of the comp like for 1 month or something like that. So you can't get the Compound, the token before 1 month. So what happened in that case?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that change. So the first thing to note is that the better way to understand what that change, or as currently as it is proposed, what that change does is it's actually not so much vesting as batching of comp distributions. So vesting kind of usually implies that there's a condition under which you could lose something that has not yet vested. In the case of what the Compound community is discussing, they're not talking about taking away your accrued comp, but they're just talking about essentially batching the comp distributions into some regular block intervals. So every, some number of blocks is when comp will be actually claimable. And then the mechanism by which it's claimed, as it's currently conceived, as far as I understand, is the same as currently, which means that the adapter will still be able to claim the comp. It's just that it will be getting it in lumps at certain block intervals. Now, the problem for us with that will be that now the adapter is accounting for who gets how much of that comp that has been accrued in lumps. Is not entirely correct, because we didn't keep track of when what was deposited, and we just assumed essentially between interactions the comp that's been accrued is proportionally accrued to everyone, proportional to their deposits in that time period. So essentially any integration that tries to capture comp rewards on behalf of other users will have to actually replicate that that lumping calculation that the compound is doing, which in my opinion is actually a huge problem for any for any other systems that are doing comp depositing into compound and claiming the comp rewards, because this accounting becomes much more complex. I think it also kind of remains to be seen what reasons the compound community will actually cite in pushing for this change, because it's effectively, if they set this period to like a week or something, then all it's doing is paying out comp in weekly lumps. It's not actually changing how much comp who gets. So it's I think a lot of it might depend on the parameters chosen there. But potentially, if that change does go through, then we will have to think about whether we need to change the accounting in the adapter.
I think the idea was to cut the farming, more or less, because the problem is farming. If you put vesting for 1 month, you remove the farming.
Well, I don't agree that it would actually remove the farming, because it just means that you will only get your comp payouts once a month, right? It doesn't actually change how much comp is accrued. So I think like it changes the economics of farming a bit, because you're not able to continuously sell your comp, but I'm not entirely convinced that it would be effective for that goal.
Okay. Well, the thing is mainly like we are very, very dependent of compound behavior and changements in the behavior, and this contract is not that flexible. That's my little problem. And also there is, I believe, a risk on the wind and unwind. First, the third question, I'm gonna go with my question. Wind and unwind, who is going to run it?
Well, anyone can call it. It's in the interests of, in some cases, in the interest of users of the adapter to call it, especially if we're calling wind. That's in the interest of the users of the adapter, because if the system if the adapter is at below target leverage, then they're actually not earning, they're leaving yield on the table. So I'd expect them to call wind after depositing, or if they observe that the ratio has gotten too low. Calling unwind is, to some extent, in the interests of depositors as well, but possibly to a greater extent, in the interests of maker governance. So they would want to call that periodically. Yeah,
the only problem is everyone can call it, even if you are not inside the vault. So it can be also on the interest of someone to call it to make sure that the vault gets liquidated.
So there's no way, there's no way that I know of to call those two functions to get someone liquidated. I don't think that's a risk as far as I know.
The risk can be if compound change the coefficient.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I send every 2 minutes wind, or you get stuck on it. You can't.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that if the coefficient changes, then things get a bit weird. I mean, I do agree with what Rain said earlier, which is that given that this adapter has pure USDC supplied and USDC borrowed positions, in how Compound works currently, I don't believe that you can actually get liquidated unless the no, I don't think you can get liquidated at all, actually.
Okay, and how do you get your money back?
Could you elaborate? Do you mean under normal circumstances, or if something?
Normal circumstances, I put USDC inside my vault. Someone do wind, block the winds. How do you withdraw your money?
So you can actually there's a certain amount that's withdrawable without calling either of those because of essentially the buffer in the kind of min and max targets of the thing. And then there's also a way that you can call.
But you decrease the coefficient by unwinded, right? Yes,
exactly. So if you look at how, I don't know if you had a chance to look at how unwind is implemented, but there's like a special branch there that lets you use it to exit. There's an argument to that function which allows you to exit your position just after unwinding.
But how do you withdraw your position if your winding is your collateral factor is very high, your ratio factor?
So the point of unwind is that unwind can actually reduce the leverage on the position, right? So you can improve the collateral factor by calling unwind. Now we don't want to allow anyone to reduce the collateral factor arbitrarily, because then someone can grief this thing by essentially unleveraging this thing and making it way too safe and making the yield way too low. So you can only unwind if you're actually going to withdraw, and the end result is that the thing is within bounds.
There is, though, a wider risk, which you're alluding to with your question, which is that Compound makes like arbitrary governance changes without announcing them beforehand. So, for example, even without just changing the collateral factor, without notifying the community, they could also completely change the logic of the comptroller to do whatever Compound governance decides they want to. They could change how cUSDC behaves. They could do all kinds of things. So you're correct in like your more general like concern that we are trusting Compound somewhat in how this adapter functions, because the funds are ultimately being held by Compound contracts.
Yes, and there is a Compound governance delay, which kind of in theory would give people an opportunity to react to changes that have been approved. Obviously, I think still in practice depends a lot on kind of communities' understanding of what the changes are and whether or not they actually need to do anything about it.
I think one of the main problems is the unwind and the wind are public, basically, for me.
I mean, I invite you to take a closer look, because the way that they're written is you shouldn't really be able to cause any harm to anyone by calling wind and unwind, because they check at the end that the collateralization of the position is within the min and max bounds, and they also have a facility to repay. To withdraw or deposit a position in between. So I think that's not supposed to be an issue. But I'm happy to talk in more detail about your.
Like if you're within the target collateralization of the contract, then those functions become no ops essentially.
Yeah, I think open methods are quite risky in general, but I think it does a lot to be open.
Well, I don't want to dismiss your concerns at all. So I would really appreciate your review of the proposed code, and if you could share those concerns in a bit more detail, maybe in the forum, then we can continue discussing it there. But I think everyone should take a look and see if they find any issues with it. It is like frankly quite complicated. The compound specific portion of the integration is a little bit more complicated, so it deserves a lot of scrutiny.
I'd note that there's also some of the arithmetic for that is exposed in the README. If you need a bit more of a background on exactly how the compound ratios and everything are working.
The other question I had reading over was how exactly are the payment distributions going to be done? Because I've got like a small account with comp, and it's very over 2 weeks, like $1 worth of comp token. So obviously that's not something that would be worthwhile for Maker to be sending out periodically, with gas fees.
So you get the distribution whenever you interact with the adapter, and if you want to force a distribution, then you just do some no-op interaction on the adapter, like you ask to deposit 0 or something, which means that you pay for the gas of your own comp distributions, and you get it as often as you want, which is exactly how it works in Compound as well. Compound doesn't send them to you; you get them automatically when you either interact with the system or specifically claim them.
You're correct though in a concern about the like small accounts and whether it's worthwhile doing it. Like these functions are expensive to call, because there's quite a lot going on behind the scenes in terms of storage costs and things like that. So if you have a small account, you probably wouldn't be interacting with this directly, just because the timescale for you to be getting a sufficient reward would be slightly too long. And in that case, you would probably be using something that's more targeted towards end users, like a yield farming operation.
It's also worth noting that there's a facility there to optimize the gas costs of wind and unwind by getting a flash loan. So if you can kind of bring your own USDC flash loan to the call, then you can end up you can call those functions with somewhat less gas used, which might be relevant for some integrations that use flash loans. This is particularly relevant actually on the opposite side of the scale. If you're doing a really big position that actually requires wind and unwind calls to be opened and closed out, then you might need a flash loan to reduce gas costs.
Hey Lab, in the MIP30 application, you talked a little bit about the insolvency of Compound and the risk. Can you just go over a scenario where that would happen and how it would affect Maker?
Right. So, at the end of the day, your tokens are supplied into Compound. Compound doesn't kind of mathematically guarantee that anything that you've put in, you're going to be able to get out. And that applies to both simply supplied tokens, and it also applies to using stuff as collateral. So if I take a loan from Compound and I post some collateral, that collateral can actually be lent out to other users. So that's a key difference to two features in Maker, which is that in Maker, when you deposit ETH collateral into an ETH CDP, for example, that ETH does not go anywhere, so it's literally just sitting there. So provided that there's no technical bugs in the system, provided you've repaid your debt, you're always going to be able to get the ETH out. There's not going to be like, oh, sorry, we don't have it right now. That would mean that something's gone wrong technically. In Compound, that can't be the case because Compound is actually lending out that ETH. And this applies whether you're simply supplying, as I said, or if you're using it as collateral, which is what this adapter is doing. So theoretically, it's possible that you'll come to Compound and they'll say that they don't have your tokens. Now, they obviously don't want this to happen, so they've implemented some measures to make this less likely. So one of them is that they try to maintain risk parameters and reserve numbers that mean that it's there's typically kind of enough cash in the system. And the other thing is that they adjust those parameters. So in particular, they adjust interest rates in order to incentivize people to deposit or repay if the system is running low on reserves. which means that, if the system was actually out of USDC and you wanted to withdraw, that would probably mean that the system is paying a very, very high rate for USDC deposits right now. And the existing users who have borrowed USDC are paying a high rate. So both of those would be incentivized to repay or supply this USDC back into the system to give it. So that's the kind of that's the compound liquidity risk angle, right? Which is that maybe Compound is actually solvent because it's got enough collateral to back all these positions, but it might be illiquid because the positions have been lent out. I feel fairly confident about the liquidity side of things because they can jack up. They do have the ability to jack up all of their rates. All the rates are floating, right? So they are able to address a liquidity crisis by adjusting rates, and at that point, eventually people will come and deposit the missing asset. Probably a greater concern is on the insolvency side. So if you actually have these borrows that are outstanding, if their collateral loses value and isn't liquidated efficiently enough, and you can actually have a shortfall, at that point you won't necessarily be able to fix it with interest rates. So, I mean, the risk I'm talking about is really the same general risk that you have if you're depositing into Compound. In general, people's assessment of that risk in this space is relative to other yield opportunities is fairly low. So people think that both from a smart contract perspective, but also from an economic risk perspective, Compound is fairly solid. But there's definitely we're no strangers to this because we're always talking about what is a safe liquidation ratio to use for ETH, for example, or what is a good liquidation mechanism and so on, and they have the same problem. So really a lot of their failure modes look very similar to ours on the insolvency side. On the illiquidity side, it's a bit different because we don't have we don't have that because our collateral isn't really hypothecated.
Sorry, I have another question.
Sure.
So basically, when you do compounds, you put USD or DAI or what you want, and you borrow more until a certain coefficient ratio. But when you maximize a certain level, you lost USDC or you lost DAI, but you get more compounds. So you have a negative interest rate. So there is another problem here, I think, is because if the vault is full, for example, no one touches it, your USD will decrease, your coefficient will increase, and your vault will get liquidated by compounds. So you need to have an active management of the vault, I believe. So
this is a good question. So firstly, yes, it may be the case that the kind of USDC position, the net USDC position can decrease. It actually depends on the vault's current compound collateralization factor and the spread between the supply and borrow rates. When this MIP was being proposed, we checked it and it actually looked like that netted out to be positive because the spread was small enough and the collateral factor was low enough that the USDC value of your position would actually be going up slightly. So you definitely wouldn't be going in the direction of liquidation there. However, we can't rely on that to always be the case because it depends on the interest rate model and the utilization of USDC and exactly where on the collateral factor scale the position happens to sit then, which is also something that's constantly floating. So the way the adapter is designed is to account for declines in the USDC equity of the position. And it should work correctly in those cases. So what happens is simply the USDC collateral that you've deposited into the adapter is actually decreasing a little bit, which means that your leverage would be increasing a little bit, and you would have to make adjustments, just like as you would with any CDP that had a fluctuating collateral value, like with an ETH CDP, right? Obviously, if the price of ETHUSD goes down, then you might get liquidated. So you have to be mindful of that. Thankfully, in this case, this process can only happen very, very slowly because, all of the rates are bounded by like, whatever kind of the compound rates usually are, right? Which is, in a day's time, you don't get a significant interest accrual, positive or negative. Plus, it's actually only the spread between the supply and borrow, meaning that it's actually smaller still. So it's not like you can get, and moreover, because we've actually set a minimum and maximum on the compound collateral factor, that means your compound collateral factor is always a little bit, lower, which again means that it's actually more, more likely that this thing is either the USDC value is either going up or isn't going down that much. But you make a very good point, which is that this is something that users need to be mindful of. I think people who are doing comp farming currently are actually well aware of this phenomenon, so that when they start their position, they'll actually see that their whatever they deposited will be going down a little bit because of this spread. Obviously, the comp yield that they're getting from it always more than compensates for that loss. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. So obviously, if you're selling off that comp, then you can use it to finance more collateral in order to keep your position.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so basically, I think there is a risk there to get liquidated in compounds. And also there is another problem is how do you liquidate it? How do you liquidate the vaults? Do you liquidate it based on the USDC, for example, or USDC plus?
So currently, as you know, liquidations for USDC for USDCA are disabled, and similarly for PAX-A and TrueUSDA, because it was deemed that with the maker's current liquidation system, it would not be worth liquidating these positions. The losses that we would suffer would likely, not justify the liquidation. This might change when liquidations 2.0 are deployed. For that reason, I would propose to treat this this collateral type in the same way until we've figured out a way of liquidating USDCA. If you did want to liquidate this, then what you would do is you would essentially just withdraw the USDC from the position. The position ultimately just converts into USDC so long as compound is liquid, and then liquidate it however you're liquidating USDC. So that could mean even sending it to literally the same liquidation contract that is being used for USDC. Currently, there is no such contract, so I would suggest not bothering with liquidations. And the liquidation side doesn't really have anything that's specific to compound or CUSDC at all.
Yes, there is still a big difference. Even if you say that the amount of USDC doesn't decrease, it might decrease at some point.
It very well might. So that's known to be a possibility.
If we don't liquidate it, we're gonna get less USDC than what we have inside the vault. Yeah,
well, so firstly, the same issue applies to USDCA, as you probably know. And actually, we had this problem because the liquidation ratios ended up getting set very close to 100, and then we actually had this risk of positions going underwater, and this was the subject of a lot of discussion on that.
It's not very insane because we don't lost money on USDC vaults. We just use it before we.
Yeah, that's a good point. What's important to note here, and actually I noted this in the MIP when discussing the proposed risk parameters for this, is that we would be using a much higher liquidation ratio for CUSDC most likely than the 101% or something that we ended up approaching with USDCA. And the reason for this is that even at a ratio of 110%, you can actually create a very, very compelling kind of leverage adjusted carry for the CDP user. So we really don't need to even consider going below 110%, in my opinion. And that means that, at a reasonable choice of stability fee, it'll be something like a year before we're looking at underwater, the positions that were created at the very beginning becoming underwater. By that point, I would hope that the USDCA liquidation problem is resolved as well, and then we can use that as well for this one.
Do you know how much we lose? Yeah, sorry. I think it's yeah, you lost probably like 4% a year. No, that's correct. Yeah, with USDC. If you
do you mean how much you would lose on compound?
Yeah.
So
when
we were proposing this MIP, if you were within the bounds of the wind and unwind bounds of the adapter hard codes, you would actually not be losing USDC.
Okay.
But that was just with those parameters, and we know that that can be different. Because if the utilization changes, that can be different. Now it can be different momentarily, and it can flip around. But we believe that there will be, plenty of time for stability fee accrual and for this like kind of USDC drag to play out before we lose 10% of the collateral.
Okay, yeah. So basically,
but it's a great point. Is that everyone involved, the CDP user and maker governance needs to be aware of this phenomenon and the fact that it's constantly changing.
Okay, cool.
My comparison to USDCA is simply that if we haven't solved the liquidation problem with USDCA, then obviously any USDC derived asset that we onboard is kind of stuck with the same problem in that we don't know how to liquidate it, because obviously the fact that it's wrapped in compound doesn't make that any easier. But the good news is that we can actually just withdraw the USDC from compound and then do the same thing. Are there any other questions?
I guess for me, it would be real quick. You probably won't have an answer for this, but I guess, would it be possible to get Gauntlet to run some scenarios? I mean, I know it would be expensive and might not have the time for it, but they're pretty good at running scenarios of insolvency and worst case scenarios.
Well, I mean, I would encourage you to approach them. I think they have experience working with compound in particular, so that could make sense. There's also the similar question, kind of just on the technical audit side, is who could we ask to review the implementation.
Nice. Any other questions, guys? Or anything that Lev or Rain would like to bring up?
Maybe I should just quickly cover the third part that I promised in the beginning. This is just about just sketching the economics of this kind of adapter. So basically the idea is the position itself, the collateral position itself has internally this compound yield optimization, borrowing, resupplying thing. But the whole point of putting this in a vault, obviously, is that you can then borrow DAI against the net equity of that underlying USDC position. And this is great for two reasons. The first reason is that by using DAI borrowing, just as any other collateral type, you can lever up the comp yield that you can get on this. And if you have an 110% collateral ratio, then that implies a max leverage of 11x, which means that whatever your interest adjusted yield looks like, you can multiply this by 11. Which is a pretty big number. So the yield is actually already fairly high. So I don't remember what it is today. I posted a link to a comp calculator in the MIP, which I recommend you play around with to understand how these recycled positions work. But I mean, today I think you can make something like up to 21% APY with max recycled USDC deposits on compound. Then obviously Maker takes a stability fee chunk out of that. And then we multiply that by 11. So really, you can get very, very kind of market leading yields for these sorts of positions. In order to realize those yields, what users have to do is, take USDC, deposit into this adapter, borrow DAI, and then sell this DAI on the market for USDC in order to get more USDC to deposit into this to get that levered position. This creates huge supply for DAI, because essentially, for every USDC deposit into this, you end up getting like 10 times as many DAI sold onto the market. So this is an extremely efficient way of incentivizing people to short DAI, which is exactly what we kind of want to hear in this sort of peg supply crisis situation. And at the same time, we will be charging probably a very healthy stability fee against this. So it can easily be 10% or more. I mean, if the comp yield is around high teens or up to 20%, then we can easily be charging 10%, leave the user with a 7% spread, and that gets levered up to 10 times, and the user is collecting 70%. So the point is that I think that we need to consider this proposal in risk compensated terms, which is that there are obviously liquidity and solvency risks in Compound, and there's all kinds of things that can happen with smart contracts. But it's also an opportunity for yield generation, income generation for the protocol, which is kind of how the protocol is supposed to work, right? It's taking risks on loans and making interest income on it. So that on its own obviously doesn't say whether or not it's a good idea or whether or not it's safe or risky, but it's just something to keep in mind, which is that we need to think about how we set those stability fees to actually make sure that we're being compensated for the risks that we're taking in the collateral portfolio. It's, in my opinion, the kind of risk reward can be very attractive for the protocol, provided that we set the parameters correctly. And I think that that's kind of the number one reason why we should be moving forward with this. The sooner the better. The fact that it really helps with the supply side of the peg is also a huge benefit. So when you're kind of considering what does MIP30 do in comparison to the existing kind of stablecoin collateral types or the PSM, then you think about it in those terms, which is that this is the only one of those proposals that actually generates meaningful stability fee revenue for the system as a compensation for the risk that it's taking.
Has Primoz or anyone from the risk team reviewed this, or I guess it's in the plan if they haven't yet, but maybe they have already?
My understanding is that they're interested in the proposal and they've been looking at it. I would like to hear when they're going to make a review of it or some comments.
So I have another question a bit on this one. Are you from the foundation or from something somewhere else?
No, I'm not affiliated with the Maker Foundation.
Say again.
I'm not affiliated with the Maker Foundation.
Oh, okay. You are just a contributor. Nice.
Community member.
Community member. Good.
Yes.
Good.
Any other questions?
I think we need to be careful to have this ratio that we don't lose money. The ratio need to be quite high. That's my only problem. I would say that we don't need to lose money on it, but yeah, that's fine for me. It's true that it's a good way to make money.
It sounds like you've looked at. It sounds like you've thought of quite a great deal about the risks in this, which is a really good thing. So I would really appreciate if you could look at it some more and then maybe kind of post some concrete concerns and risks that you're seeing, and so that we can, because some of these things, it really helps just to have a discussion going about them, where people might disagree about how much of a risk something is, but I think it would be really good if you could flag those. Probably in the comments on the MIP would be the best place to do that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and we are recording it, so you can go back and review some of the stuff we discussed. So you can add like those cogent points to discuss. It would be really helpful for the whole community because we can all see it. I think once you see the numbers, you can actually route it through. Whereas like right now we're talking in hypotheticals.
So now we have homework, Alexis. Do you have any other questions
No more
before
question.
we?
No. Oh yeah, yeah, there is also a problem with, I think it's okay. The liquidity, but you said it's okay, but problem is it's okay for small amounts, probably not for big amounts. I mean, I think there is 300 million inside the compound, but I don't know exactly how much.
So what you mentioned is that there's a curve that's going to influence the amount of liquidity, both for the supply and the demand. So that should be relatively taken care of in the long term.
Problem is, it's how Yuan got stuck now with the DAI. Yuan, they had a problem with it, I think, with the liquidity on curve. Because the problem is, if you can't withdraw your position, you can be in a bad situation.
I am not aware of the Yarn situation to be able to speak about it.
I'd be curious to hear about that. I don't know about it either.
Yeah, they with ETH on with Maker, they put a lot of ETH and borrow a lot, and when the ETH went down, they couldn't withdraw. They couldn't withdraw DAI, so they were stuck in it.
Yeah, the discussion is about the WETH vaults on Yearn. So where they were doing like a leveraged, well, they were putting ETH into Maker and then drawing DAI against it and selling it. Sorry, and then putting it into the DAI vault in Yearn, which used this curve to farm CRV.
Yeah, and in that case, basically, we will be on the position of
The issue was because of the way that the instant curve is set. Yeah, you would have this big slippage when you try to withdraw like a lot of DAI.
And if some bug is inside the vault, we want to withdraw quickly everything, and we get stuck on it.
Yeah, that was a curve specific issue. I believe they have reduced that parameter now, partly in response
for this vault. If we have a problem with this vault, we want to withdraw the money from the vault from compounds. We won't be able to withdraw. I don't know. We might not be able to withdraw all of the money if we get a problem with the vault.
Yeah, depending on the specific nature. Yeah.
It's basically we loan the money, right? So we need to get it back.
Yeah, that's what I meant before when I said that we have to bear in mind unknown compound risks here, because we are ultimately giving them the funds.
I mean, for me, the main concern is ultimately compound solvency risk rather than liquidity risk, because it seems like the worst case scenario with the liquidity event would be we removed, users of the vaults removed as much USDC from compound as they could. And then if compound didn't have enough, then they would be dry. And then this would drive up the interest rates on compound, and compound would, obviously make some attempts to recapitalize because otherwise, that was like the goal of their whole system, right, is to deal with that. So then, we would have to probably wait, and then maybe we'd be able to withdraw more as it comes in. And as long as the system is solvent, then I would expect that they would, ultimately be able to manage this problem. And moreover, we're only talking about one compound asset, which is that we're only worried about compound USDC. So we're not worried about the other assets on compound, so long as as it's solvent. So, the worst case scenario with the liquidity crisis kind of doesn't seem so bad, obviously compared to a solvency issue.
Right. So I guess there's no more questions, or does anyone have like a parting words before we call it an evening or day, depending where you are?
One last thought. The community seems to think that we have like too much exposure to USDC, and this is basically allowing for more like a riskier version of USDC. So do we have a response to that in terms of why it's still good to be implementing?
Yeah, my perspective on this is basically we should decide what our comfort with USDC exposure is, and then within that we need to optimize how we do it. So we should always choose something that offers a better risk reward on USDC over something that has no poor risk reward. So I would say that if you want to put it from that perspective, if you have this much USDC that you're willing to take on, do you want to be paid 0% on it or 2% on it, or do you want to be paid 10% or 15% on it? Because ultimately the system is not. We're not supposed to never take any risks. We're supposed to make sure that we're compensated for those risks, because that's kind of the point of having buffer and kind of ensuring the system with MKR backstop and so on. Of course, I want to reiterate that this does not mean that we should go out and take all kinds of risks, especially if they're not adequately compensated. It's just that I think that the discussion should be framed in terms of how well are we being compensated for USDC risk, and is it worth it in light of that, rather than a pure binary yes, no on USDC. Now, obviously, if your policy is hardline no on USDC, then this proposal probably isn't that interesting to you, because it's just another way of getting it. Of course, then you're also against all these other things that we're doing, so you've got some other battles to fight. But to me, this is kind of if you view that as an evil, then this is kind of a lesser of evils, because we're kind of selling our soul to USDC, but at least we're getting paid for it, which in the other proposals we're not necessarily. So that's what I would say to that concern.
That's a great framing. Thank you.
Oh, if you're going to sell your soul, at least do it for money. Sorry, Yaron, I thought you were going to say something.
Yes, so I'm not sure, maybe people asked it before, but was it considered the fact that we kind of introduced a circular dependency now between compound and dye? I mean, that if dye goes to 0, then the USDC will also likely go, maybe not to 0, but it will affect the USDC, the compound USDC price.
Yeah, I think this is a good point. And moreover, this is also constantly changing, because compound's exposure to dye is constantly changing, and it's not as straightforward as looking at how much dye is supplied to compound. You actually have to net out dye positions probably per account to figure that out. Interestingly, compound seems to be moving forward now with a proposal to increase the collateral ratio on dye, which means the compound's exposure to dye will actually decrease, which from this circularity perspective is a good thing for us. But I mean, I think we undoubtedly have to keep it in mind. I mean, if you think about it from a kind of accounting perspective, then I don't think that circularity is in itself problematic, because ultimately every dye is still backed by some real collateral, right? Like if you look at the dye that's in compound that's backing our USDC claim, so to speak, that dye was then issued by some CDP, which is backed by some collateral. So you're not getting something out of nothing here. So from that sense, it's kind of legit. But obviously, having these tight, interrelationships between systems is potentially a risk.
Yeah, but you do get that, some dye is backed by CUSD and CUSD is backed by dye. But yeah, okay, either way, no.
But those aren't absolute claims, right? So those are quantitatively sort of claims, right? So if you actually look at how much of each thing it's backed by, then it all kind of works out. We're not making dye out of thin air in the process.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's like a complete pyramid, just that it does introduce some circularity. No, okay. Also, I'm not really expert on emergency shutdown, etc., but just wondering if it has any implications there.
In emergency shutdown, you'd be getting these kind of packaged compound levered positions, basically, with the dye debt deducted. So it's nothing too crazy happens there.
Hey, Yaron, not to put you on the spot, but is this something you think your protocol could take advantage and, I guess, use for attracting more users into Maker Vaults and actually compound eventually?
Actually, Frank, we have a full call with the B protocol tomorrow. So I was going to,
that's right, yeah.
to mention that
maybe
for our.
Yeah, just maybe to give a quick answer. So, like on the face of it, as Lev mentioned, USDC and liquidations of DAI doesn't really seem to be related at this point. Clearly when there are liquidations, etc., then it could be interesting.
You should definitely ask Yaron tomorrow about how the protocol will work with liquidations 2.0.
We will. Okay, so guys, thanks again for joining. Thank you, Lev and Rain, for this great presentation. Well, and the rest for joining me. It's always great to have you, Frank, Rose. Well, same for Alexis and all the hard work. And yeah, tomorrow we have B protocol at 7 p.m. UTC. So that's Tuesday, the 8th of December. And this Wednesday, 9th of December at 6 p.m. UTC, we'll have Melon protocol. So Mona Lisa will be joining us. More information in the forum as always. And yeah, let's keep the discussion going over there. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks guys. Please comment in the MIP because all of your concerns and grievances need to be discussed.
Thank you guys.